Whether you are watching or listening to this, you are hearing the voice of Sophie Green, watching Sophie Green on her own because Rachael Johns is not with me. We were going to meet to record a new intro for our episode with Christine Wells, but Rachel's been caught up with some Romance Writers of Australia business, and it is Saturday and we need to get the episode out for Sunday. So I thought I'd just do a short intro to explain that when we recorded this interview with Christine quite a few weeks ago now, our own intro to the episode had different things in it, things that are very much of the past, very much not relevant anymore. So we wanted to do a new intro. That's really all we were going to do. So this is that intro to set up the fact that we are talking to Christine Wells, who has a new book called The Paris Gown out now, and you'll hear Rach in that episode, and you'll also hear her in the intro for our next episode. So happy listening and happy watching. Thanks for being here. Our guest is Christine Wells, who writes historical fiction featuring strong, fascinating women. After graduating from university with a law degree, Christine worked in a large city firm specialising in corporate mergers and acquisitions. She might still be a lawyer if she hadn't accepted a challenge from her friend to try her hand at a novel. Christine has gone on to publish 16 novels set in periods ranging from Georgian England to post-World War II France. Her next novel is The Paris Gown. Yes, I've got that right. The Paris Gown, and it will be published in August this year. Passionate about helping other writers learn the craft and business of writing fiction, Christine enjoys mentoring and teaching workshops whenever her schedule permits. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Sophie. Hi, Rach.
Hello. I did not know that you started writing because as a sort of challenge or yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, I remember this differently, but my best friend said this was what it was. We both loved the novels of Georgette Heyer, and she just said, isn't it sad there aren't any more? She passed away. I think she passed away the year I was born or shortly beforehand.
Oh, wow.
And then I just went, I think I'll write one of those. And years later, I thought it would be easy.
Yeah, so did I when I decided to write a romance.
Yes, not really the romance as a genre. Like I didn't have that.
Yeah.
But I thought I have read and reread these books so often.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I can write anything, it will be one of these. So, and the funniest thing is that book that I wrote, it had a million characters and too many plot lines and never saw the light of day. But my sister-in-laws, both of them actually, to this day say that's their favorite of my books.
Really?
I don't know what that says about the subsequent ones. But
don't worry,
yeah.
I hate that when people say to me, "Oh, my favorite book you have ever written was Jilted," and that's like my first.
Yeah.
Like,
Maybe it's because it's the first one they read of yours, so they have this emotional connection. Like that's when they formed a relationship with you, if you know what I mean.
Maybe.
How many?
Maybe it's because there were no naughty bits in it.
Oh, do they not like the naughty bits?
Maybe it's a bit too.
I know today we're going to talk more about like your whole career as a whole, because you've had some ups and downs like so many of us in the writing career, and you're still here. So before we start, Sophie, can I just butt in and ask a couple of questions?
Of course, go for it.
My first question, just to get some background, I'm taking notes here, is what was that like? How long ago was it you wrote that first novel, the first one that will never see the light of day?
I think I started it in 2000. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was still working as a lawyer then.
And how many books did you write before you got published?
It was 2 full books.
Wow, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. I have a theory about that, which I'll share.
Well, just share it now. Let's put it in context. Share it now.
Well, I think I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had enough of a grasp. And I think that's a dangerous thing because I was a very good English student and I could put a sentence together and I knew grammar and that's not enough, obviously. But I felt like I sold my first book before I really knew how to do a high concept sort of book. It was very much of the genre, but it was nothing spectacular. And I felt like I sold a bit too early in that respect. You know, I would say to people, debut authors, do you really, really want to come out of the gate up at the top?
Yeah.
Because your debut is actually your best chance to get up high on the rung, on the ladder, and there is no ladder really, but
Oh, totally. We
yeah.
spoke, I think it was last week, and I think we have published that one because we've posted out of order, but about the fact that my biggest sort of advice often is don't rush, because I think these days so many people, and you know, I would have rushed if there was options, but luckily my first book or second book or third book or fourth book did not get picked up like yours. But like it is that's such a really good point, you know, to make sure that. But I'm curious, why do you think, like, if it was just an okay book, I mean, we haven't read it, so you could just be, you know, we're just taking your word for this. Why do you think it got published? What was it about?
I think it had quite a charming heroine. You know, it was not sort of, I think it was average for a published book, put it
Yeah,
that way. I mean, like I'm a bit of a, you know, set the bar quite high,
yeah,
and I guess uh, I felt in hindsight it was a nice book. It actually sold very well. Um, but I think the initial print one was 30,000 copies or something, and I think it pretty
okay.
much sold that, which in US terms is not
Yeah.
all that
No,
big,
but
but
for a
it's
first
not.
debut, like a debut book and stuff, that's nothing to be
Yeah,
sneezed
and
at.
it won the Golden Heart, which is an
Yeah.
unpublished manuscript thing. It also was doing well in contests, and one of the editors said she wanted to buy it. So then I got an agent. I didn't say yes. I said, "Can you wait? Because I'm looking at agents," and sort of ended up with an agent by the end of that week, and then a contract by the Monday. So it was just like a
Wow,
ridiculous,
whirlwind.
yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Because it sounds like this manuscript actually was very, very good. It was getting a lot of attention, you know, it was
Yeah.
winning prizes and things like that. So I'm wondering if you look back at it now and it's knowing what you know now about yourself as a writer that you're thinking, hey, it wasn't as great as it could be. Whereas actually at the time, it obviously
Mm.
was doing very well.
I think yeah, it's just hard. Like, yes, now I have a much higher standard for what I
Yeah.
think will be marketable, and even at the time, I think, you know, the Julia Quinn style of books were doing really well, and mine was much more a traditional style and very much, you know, I did a lot of research and really stuck to that, whereas the Regency was developing into this more fantasy kind of
Yeah.
thing that I didn't quite get. That was what the market wanted.
Oh, that
Um,
is often about trends, isn't it? Again, like, and you know,
yeah,
right, like coming in at the right or the wrong time and all that sort of stuff.
yes,
So
So,
yes.
could you actually just give us a little history about the books you've written? Because as I said, there were 16
Yeah.
published and there's another one coming out.
yeah.
Can you just give us a little sense of you've now told us how you started with a published book,
Mm.
but what sort of genres you've written in and whereabouts in the world?
Hang on,
Yeah.
before she does, should we say that we invited Christine on today kind of because we wanted to speak about someone who has longevity in their writing career, but hasn't necessarily you know, well, you've changed, you've moved, you've changed yourself, you've changed your name, you've changed what you've done, you've kept, well, reinventing, that's the word. You've reinvented the wheel. You've had some hurdles along the way that have well, setbacks, but you haven't let them, you know, you haven't just given up. And I think
Mm.
that's really interesting, because I think so many people in writing do have setbacks. Like the majority of us don't have a really smooth run for decades, right? You know, there's
Yeah.
always yeah, the people that are still there, like you're still writing, you're still you know, putting books out and getting contracts and all that sort of stuff. There's got to, we want to unpick why, you know, what is this about you and how have you done it? So yes, I think it's important, as Sophie said, to tell us about your writing, your publishing sort of history, and just want to let the readers or the listeners know that's what we wanted to discuss today, that, writing.
Rach, that's not the order we discussed before I started recording. You've thrown me off balance.
Oh,
I
sorry,
don't know what I'm doing now.
I just felt like that we should explain why we were talking to Christine.
Throw
Anyway,
that out the window.
I'm
Let's
just
go.
jumping the gun. So there you go. Answer Sophie's question.
So I'm trying to be brief. I sold in 2006 to Berkeley Publishing, which is an imprint of Penguin, or what was at that time. It's Penguin Random House now. So I did 4 books for them. By the 4th book, we'd been through the global financial crisis. My 2nd book got a Rita nomination, which is another RWA thing.
Big award in the I'll cut in there to say that people don't know that was the Romance Writers America's massive award, which is like the Academy Awards or the Oscars of the romance writing world. So it's a big deal.
Well, it was really exciting, but that book did not sell well because it came out just as the global financial crisis hit. And then it was sort of downhill from there, to be honest, with the sales. Because the booksellers have a record of how many books you sold last time. And so it's really hard to recover. They don't think, 9/11 happened that day, or, whatever. They don't think of excuses. They just look at that book and say, oh, it didn't sell very well. We'll order half as many again or something. So anyway, I thought my career was over by book 4. I was just going, and receiving, I have to say, fairly minimal guidance from my agent. You know what the flight is like over to America, and to be told, oh, we need to get you better covers. That was all she said. when I got to the conference and had my meeting with her, and I thought, that's just not going to get me anywhere.
How many agents have you had in this time?
I've had 3.
3.
So
I was just checking. Yeah.
All American?
Yes. Yes. She is an excellent agent. She does a great job for other people. I have, it just, at that stage, I was thinking time to move on.
We did an episode on agents, and we were saying, that agents what's good for one person might not necessarily fit for another person, and so it's all kind of subjective.
Yeah, and I think too that they start off, a lot of them start off very excited, and then they get less excited, and the new shiny things come along, and so
like publishers too, I reckon. No offense, Sophie. Sophie's been an agent and a publisher.
Yes, I'm not saying anything against agents. So the one I have now is fantastic. So I moved on to another agent. She said, let's move houses, publishing houses. She really impressed me because she had read one of my published books, and told me how much she loved it, what she loved about it. And she actually sort of acted as my agent even before I signed with her, because I was really cautious to go into that again. So I thought, oh, this is great. So she got me double the money at a new publisher. But the condition was I had to change my name because of the bad record of sales. So I was still writing in the same genre, but I changed my name. And
how did you feel about that?
Yeah.
Well, I just said yes straight away. I had, because I'd been in such a turmoil about my career, thinking it was all over, because there was no indie publishing then. You have this bad sales track and you think your life is over. And in Australia, they didn't publish the sort of books I wanted to write. So there really wasn't another alternative I could see at that time. And I have to say, Alison Rushby is an Australian author. She
Yep.
writes all kinds of books, children's books, women's fiction, romance, everything. And she said to me, you are a writer, you will always be a writer, and no one can take that away from you. And that is a skill that is transferable, versatile, you know, and she actually got me out of this funk
Yeah.
and able to say, well, okay, pick myself up. What can
Yep,
I do
yep.
about this? And I wasn't dropped by the publisher. You know, they would have kept.
Yeah, but you wanted
Um,
something different.
yeah, yeah.
you-
So I just saw. I didn't know how I was going to come back from that when nobody seemed to care or have a strategy
yeah.
to do it. So I went to St. Martin's Press, which is Pan Macmillan in America. And I did a 6-book series with them. You know, when I started, they said, "Oh, we don't want series. Series, you know, series isn't the thing." And then you saw all of these authors coming out with these back to back to back paperback releases. Like they do one per month for 3 months running.
Yeah.
So they'd have to write all 3 books, and
Before
it was
it was
just an absolute nightmare to do. But that's what people were doing at that stage.
Mhm.
And I really enjoyed writing that series. But
Can you
I
tell us a
start.
bit about the series quickly? That
Oh, that was the Ministry of Marriage series. So it was
that's a
all
great
arranged
title.
marriages. That was the concept. And it was a bit more high concept, and you know, they sold pretty well. And I think my 6th book was the best seller of all of them.
That was under Christine Brooks. Yeah, or Christina
Christina
Brooks.
Brooke.
That is
Yeah.
how I met you.
Yes.
Christina and I have known each other for quite a few years now through the Romance Writers of Australia. And when I joined RWA as a newbie author, knowing nothing and nobody, I remember that Christina was one of the people who were published and looked to having this fabulous, you know, US career with gorgeous covers. And I remember, yeah, looking up to you a lot.
Oh, that's so kind, because I look up to you. So I think we've got a mutual admiration society.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was 6 books, but
And I
everybody
didn't know
was
you had
starting.
another, I should say, I didn't know that was your second, you know, sort of, what's the word? Your second
Yeah,
Iteration, maybe.
second
iteration.
persona.
That's right, because I
And
had no idea
you know,
until you
I
started
think
talking now.
I think it was quite embarrassing. Like, I'm being really honest here. It was
Yeah,
embarrassing
appreciate it.
because everybody in the industry knew the reason I had changed, and a lot of people thought I'd been dropped by my publisher.
Yeah.
And, you know, like to this day, that is the first thing they sort of say to me. And it's
But
like,
we're setting the
well,
record
I
clear here. You
actually, actually, I wasn't. But anyway,
But so many
yeah.
people are, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the thing.
Ah,
Like, I was going to say, when you went through this uh situation where you had to make that decision, do you keep going with your current publisher who, you know, may not put the effort in to help you elevate, which you really needed at that stage, or do you make the decision? How many people did you know at the time who had been in a similar position? Because I feel like it wasn't really something till a few years ago that many people like talked about. It's like once you're published, it's this secret little thing that a few people might know the truth. But,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
before,
I know about
yeah,
5 authors who were around at the time, some of whom aren't even writing anymore,
yeah.
who got dropped.
Because
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's not a thing that, you know, it's not a rare thing, sadly.
No.
Getting dropped or having
Mm.
to shift gears is something that happens to a lot of authors. And as you said though, there's sort of, I guess you either give up then, do you, or you do what you did. So what did you do? Yeah, tell us the next sort of step.
Yeah, so, I because everybody was starting to write so fast, I
Mm,
started to write 2 books a year, and I had small children,
wow.
one of whom was diagnosed with autism, and that as well, it was a lot. And there was one book actually, which, you know, romance is a very unusual beast, and my editor had come up with titles for all of the second 3 books in the series. So the first 3 was the girls, the second 3 was the boys. It was a bit like a Brady Bunch kind of situation where
Love
you
it.
had 3 girls, 3 boys, and each of them had their romance. And so she had come up with titles for the 3 boys, one of which did not, like, they were already in the series and the title didn't suit the guy who I was writing about. So, and she wouldn't budge. She said, no, they are the titles.
Oh.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to make a cousin, a new character, and he's going to be the man for that title, because I couldn't possibly, like, it was London's Last True Scoundrel was the title. And this guy was this, like, he was the rock of the family. He was the stage. And unless he'd been living this double life, there was no, so I wrote that book in 2 months because
Wow.
I was, already.
Yeah.
And
Would you say you're
anyway,
a fast writer normally? Sorry, I'm so like.
no, I am when I have to be.
Yeah.
But I get the momentum up really slowly, and then I just go like a steam train towards the end. So but when I have to, I can do it, I guess.
Yeah.
But so I was a little bit burnt out by then. And I found that a lot of the time I was really interested in the heroines and I was telling the female story. And by that time, Penguin here were publishing my romances. They had got the Australian rights from St. Martin's Press. So they were getting into romance at that time. And so I got to know an editor there who's no longer there. And she said, why don't you write, a Kate Morton style book for us? And that, I just thought, like, it was just a change of pace and just slowing down. They didn't want 2 books a year. They didn't even want 1 book a year if I didn't want to. And so I really enjoyed writing that book, and that was The Wife's Tale, which was my first. Thank you. That was my first historical fiction. So since then, so I did. I've been all over the place. I did 3 books with Penguin in Australia, and the problem with that a little bit was I really wanted to sell foreign rights. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out I had kept the foreign rights. That's a really good tip. If you can possibly keep your foreign rights, that's good to do, because then you can sell them on.
Yeah.
But they didn't get sold, which was really frustrating. I just thought The Wife's Tale would be perfect for the English market, but the English market's really difficult to get into, and then you have all those problems. If you've already sold the Australian rights, it's hard to sell the UK. So I ended up giving Penguin world rights for the 3rd book, and again didn't sell the foreign rights. And so I thought, because I was with the romances, they were always selling foreign rights for things. So then I decided, okay, I'm a little bit, I just want to go back to the US market. And I'd seen that Kate, oh gosh, the name's escaping me, which is
Kate
so
Quinn,
silly.
no?
Kate Quinn. Yes, Kate Quinn had.
But...
Yeah, and I know her so well, and just was blanking. Kate Quinn had the Alice Network, and that was exactly the sort of book I was writing already. I was doing World War II spies, female spies, and so I had come across this idea about Catherine Dior, the sister of Christian Dior, and I sort of knew that nobody had done it yet, and I thought, it's such a great idea. I can't believe nobody has written this. And so I approached a really great historical fiction agent in the US. In fact,
I was going to say, you'd parted ways with your second agent by this stage?
Oh, yes, I had. And then so the new agent, she is Kate Quinn's agent.
Yeah.
So I emailed her with this idea. I didn't have a word written. I just had this sort of page with all the atmosphere of, this is going to be about the new look and Dior's opening this new fashion house, but we've also got this background with the resistance, and that became Sisters of the Resistance. So that it was funny because COVID hit just as she went out with that book.
Oh, no.
And I thought, so many times I thought I was nearly there, and I'm going to be foiled again.
But you weren't. Obviously, she sold it.
Yeah, she sold it in a preempt to
Wow.
HarperCollins New York, and luckily HarperCollins Australia brings out the Australian version, so they've got world English rights, so that kind of comes out under the New York company's banner, but then I sell foreign rights separately. Yeah.
Wow.
So sorry, that was really long.
No, that's good. So we went from Christine Wells to Christina Brooks, back to Christine Wells. I'm just curious, how did you manage, like, why going back to that name? Why not a different name again? Or why not the same name? Was that because it was two different stories? Like Christina Brooks,
two different genres, I think. Yeah. And I never, I just felt like I'm not having another name. I just,
yeah.
no. So
we need to talk about pseudonyms at some stage, Sophie. I think that's on our list as well.
Yeah.
That could be handy. That could be handy.
Yeah.
So Christine, I guess I'm interested in what sustains you through all of these vicissitudes of publication and writing, and that pace you talked about when you were doing the 3 books and then the other 3 books and the requirement to have all these books written at once and out at once. It's so demanding, and the publisher in me just goes, oh, what a thing to do to an author, because they're not automatons, right? So that whole idea that you should just pump it out, we want the content. It could be not only soul destroying, but just exhausting.
Yeah. And I think when you're tired too, although I did not have to do one of those back-to-back things, that's what other authors were doing, but I did have to do 2 books, and they were 90 to 100,000 words too. I mean,
that's a
not
lot.
as long as Rachel's books, but
well, I don't know. The one I'm writing now, I'm scared I'm not going to meet 90,000 words the first time ever.
I think I've heard that before from you, Ray. And
maybe.
I think you always do. You always do. Yeah, I think I had to really dig deep after that first calamity and just say to myself, I can't stop writing. Like, I know Rach always says to people, if you can stop, do. I just can't. So, I just had to find a way. And I discovered that actually, past sales can be tough, but they're not insurmountable. And there are different markets you can try. There are different genres you can try. And I just really tried to detach from, I think there are plenty of books that get a lot of attention from publishers and from readers that are not great books. Let's just put that out there. I'm not saying mine are better. I'm just saying
I know exactly what you mean.
that sales does not equal that. Just because you sell well doesn't necessarily mean it's a great book, and just because you don't sell well, like somebody said, I think it was Jane N. Krentz or somebody like that, who said a good book is an author's triumph, a bestseller is a publisher's triumph.
I love that. That's really good.
And I think that, not wanting to make excuses, but, things happened to me, like my editor left. For The Trader's Girl, which was my second Penguin book, they flew me to Melbourne. They said, we're going to do all these things for the book: television, light boxes in airports, everything. And I thought, I'm finally on my way. They had quite a large print run. And then the publicist left the week before publication date. She had not done anything, not
Oh my
even
gosh.
library visits. So it was just like,
You hear
you
about
know,
publishers leaving and you're not having like people. Oh, I had that in the US actually. You know, the publisher left that was excited about me, and basically nothing happened. But you don't hear so much about publicists leaving and not done any work. But I guess again, that's just so many things that are out of your control.
yeah. Yeah. And so you just have to say after a while, okay, like, and actually Sisters of the Resistance, which I'll just hold up.
Please do.
This was, it did really well. It was a bestseller in Barnes and Noble. It was Canada Globe and Mail bestseller. I think it was a bit of a bestseller here, but only in the historical fiction section. And I did nothing differently. Like, you know what I mean? All of that was publisher support.
Yeah, that
I
is
would
so.
say.
Well,
And
I do think to get published in the first place, I always think is about planets aligning, and then beyond that, the planets have to keep aligning. You know, so the things you're talking about, a publicist leaving or a publisher leaving, this is a planet moving out of alignment, and it's frustrating. And for an author who's spent so much time working on a manuscript and then placing it with a publisher to see it happening when it is beyond your control, there is no proper answer. You know what I mean? Because those planets just move out of alignment. And for you, I guess, with a long career, you've seen quite a bit of that coming and going. And sometimes those planets really do line up and sometimes they don't. So I guess it's a case of you having maintained your faith in what you're doing all this time.
I guess that's the whole thing about the books, isn't it? Knowing your book is not, you know, the worst thing out there, and you're a competent writer, and knowing that it's not you. You've got to remind yourself it's not your book.
Yeah, and I think I just took the ego out of it a bit and just said, okay, I've had the worst, you know, one of the worst things happen to me, and had to change my name, and everybody knew, and it's like, you know, where can you go from there? Just keep going, just keep swimming.
Sophie often talks about ego, don't you? And I was thinking
ego in essence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Christine, it's the difference between working from ego and working from essence. And if you're working from ego, it can take you so far, but it will trip you up eventually, because it's a fairly shallow pool from which to draw. But if you're working from your essential self, and it's something that you really want to do, when you're feeling that drive to do it, that's a power that can really sustain you through a lot of difficulty and challenge and change.
Yeah, and you know, I've really connected with what you said about sort of, you know, stepping back from it and really living in the moment and all of that kind of stuff, all of that stuff that seems really trite. You spend so long writing a book, you really have to enjoy the process. It can't all be about the results. And I say that to my boys, you know, when they're training for running events or whatever. On the day, I just say to them, look, you know, you've achieved the thing that you set out to do. You've trained really hard. You've done everything you can in preparation for this. Anything can happen on the day, but your victory has already happened. And I think if you think about it that way with your book, just writing the book, editing the book, getting it as good as you think you can make it, that's your victory. It has to be. And I mean, I really envy all of those writers that I see who seem to have a rails run, but sometimes when you drill down into the reality of it, a New York Times bestseller has had one book hit the New York Times list and then never another book, but they can always say that they were a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's that Instagram effect. There are people's careers who seem so great from the outside, but you know, and there are people who really have had a rails run, and you know.
We've talked about this, I don't know, together, like separately or on air, in terms of, you know, what is on social media is not always, you know, the reality. I mean, we all know that in terms of life, you know, but in terms of career, often, you know, if you went on social media, you could, you'd think certain people were doing amazingly, but then if you actually, knew the facts, you'd realize that you're probably doing just as well, or not,
Yeah.
even better than some of these people who, but what I was thinking about that is, how do you handle, and this is possibly for all of us, because I think in our current time, social media is, we've done a whole episode on that, but social media is a part of our writing life for most of us, right? We are somehow involved in social media. And it is hard then. Sometimes I know I have to check my own like mental health and emotion when I'm, and sometimes take a little step away from social media, because if you're not feeling in a great place about either your writing or your career or sales, it's very hard to see somebody else supposedly getting everything when you've put in the same amount of work, you feel, or more work. And I was wondering, like, how do you cope, or do you like with comparison kind of thing? You know what I mean?
Oh, I have been a real one. There's always one person, I must admit, and I just look at them and, it's just like, ooh. And then invariably I meet them in real life and they're lovely people and they're really nice. And then I just go, oh, okay, well,
So
that's,
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really try not to be envious. It's
Mm.
really hard not to be, isn't it? And
Yeah, I
It's
do think
human.
I know. And I mean, people would probably look at the three of us sometimes and think, what have you to be envious of? Like, why are you even thinking about that? But there's always people doing better than you, and there's always people,
Yeah.
worse than you or whatever. But I think that it's really is true that comparison is a thief of joy. And I do try to remind myself that, and to go, and I think maybe this is similar to how you've managed to keep going through, different iterations of saying, is that I have to look back and think, what did I want to do? I wanted to write a
Mm.
book. I wanted to get it published, and I wanted to, make a teacher's wage kind of thing. And it's so easy when you've achieved the first part of your goal, or the goal, you've achieved that original goal. Because I think often our goals, like, we don't set out to go, I want to hit the New York Times. When you first decide to write a book, you're just running to write that book and get it published. Am I right? Or is it, you're not
Yeah,
thinking,
no.
I would like this book to be made into a movie. I would like to hit the New York Times bestseller list.
Mm.
We don't look that far ahead. But so I find that when I am comparing myself, or being jealous or envious, or thinking it's not fair, even though all of us have grown up with being told by our parents, I'm sure you guys were as well, life is not fair, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
even though we know that, like, I think then I have to really take a step back and check myself and say, look, you've got what you wanted. Anything else is kind of a bonus. And I don't know how you go with. Oh,
But do
sorry.
you? This is the thing. So this is partly, I think, to do with the subject of ambition and what your ambitions are and what we feel we're allowed to claim as our ambition. So you were talking about the initial goal was to write a book, and you weren't thinking, oh, I want to go onto a bestseller list.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong though with starting
No,
out.
there's
Saying, I
not.
want to get
That's
it.
true.
And it's I'm not implying that there would have been anything wrong if you thought it either. It's more just, I think women in particular are socialized to not, well, ambition's not feminine, I think, is probably where I'm heading with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not an acceptable thing for us to admit to. We can presume that people feel it, but I don't think we're allowed to say, actually, yeah, I do really want to be a bestseller. And maybe it's just an Australian cultural thing, because we talk about people being up themselves, and there's the tall poppy syndrome. So if you had an Australian author who was like, oh yeah, well, I'm totally going to be a bestseller, you think, oh, really? And that's a worthwhile ambition. Or even if they say, I want to be a bestseller, it's a totally worthwhile ambition. But I also think we censor ourselves internally before we even get to the point of wanting to say anything. So I do think we think that's, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's too lofty a goal. I shouldn't admit to that. I shouldn't even want that. I should just keep my ambitions modest, because who am I to want that? So I do think ambition's a really interesting subject, and it's also what propels us to keep writing in some respects, because we have an ambition to write the next book, or we have an ambition to write a better book or a better selling book. And for me, at least, it can be distilled to that. I'm ambitious for my writing. I'm not necessarily as ambitious for sales, but it's great when it happens.
Yeah, no, I think that Interestingly, I did a Becca Syme Write Better Faster course. I don't know if you've heard of, I mean, you would have, Rach, but Sophie Becca Syme is sort of a bit of a guru in the US, mainly for indie writers, but she's got this Write Better Faster Academy. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to get the silver bullet for how to stop procrastinating and, you know, get to my book faster and what have you. And what came out of it was, yeah, that's just you. And but also you do this Clifton Strengths test, and my number one strength is strategic. And so I don't know that it's me saying, yes, I'm going to be on the New York Times list, but it's always in my head, you know, how can I, for my next book, how can I come up with a concept that is worthy of being on the New York Times list? You know, but I think my problem is communicating that to the people who matter. Because I'm always very much, yes sir, no sir, you know, like whatever the publisher is going to do for me, that's okay. And, you know, could we push for just a little bit more here, a little bit more there? But I'm never going into any meeting going, right, I don't want to be on the New York Times list, because I think, and then they're just going to go, yeah, no.
But would they? So that's an interesting, what you've just said is really interesting. Like why wouldn't you go in saying that?
Well, because the publisher, as you know, has to decide that that's what you're going to do with this book. You know what I mean? It's like,
in terms of, I know.
Nobody gets on the New York Times. No one gets on the New York Times list unless their publisher has decided that that's where they're going to be.
But I guess, as Sophie says, if we ask and push,
you don't ask, you don't get.
All that can happen is no. That whole interesting thing about ambition, because I find, like, I would say, yes, that I'm ambitious, and that I want to keep doing this and growing and writing better books, right? But then I have that thing where I have to check myself, because I do want that, but I don't want it at the cost of, like, my mental health and kind of being able to continue to do this, if that makes sense. So that's what I mean. Like, to me, I have to sometimes not think about that and remind myself that, that would be nice, but like, so I guess it's your different strengths, it's how you work, it's how your brain thinks. Because to me, I really find that just looking at what I've done and saying, if I can keep doing that, then that's enough. Like, that gives me the sort of permission to continue and make me feel okay about what I'm doing. Whereas if I'm continually like saying, oh, I want to sell 50,000 copies more, or I want to, you know, get a movie deal, or like, I just feel that then I'm unhappy with what I've got, and that doesn't give me a healthy creativity sort of, you know, I don't know if I'm making.
Is there a way to reframe it though? Is there a way to say, rather than, because that's sort of starting from the point of, as you said, I don't want it to affect my mental health. It's if you reframe it as, that is going to be amazing. I am amazing. That's going to be so. And in terms of looking at that goal or that ambition and thinking, that's actually something that I can do and that I deserve, and it's going to be fantastic, and my mental health is going to be great. Even just to experiment with the idea.
I think half the problem is, though, what Christina said, is that so much of it is out of our control. Like, you know, so I can try and write a better book. I can put my effort into writing 2 books a year if I can, or I can do, you know, I can achieve certain things, but I can't, apart from trying to write a good book, and even as you've said, Christina, even if we do write an amazing book, it doesn't mean it's gonna hit the, you know, highest place and stuff. So I think part of it for me is that all those things are out of my control. So thinking about them too much, or like reaching for them and saying, this is I want, it to me, it's like, that's just a way to be disappointed. Whereas if I work hard and do my best, and not, like, I love what you said, Christine, about your kids and about, you know, taking the joy and the sort of I can't even, I can never think of the right
Yeah.
word,
The
but
joy in the process rather than in what
being happy with
the
what
outcome
you've done and
is.
what
Yeah.
you've created and doing that. Like, to me, that makes for, so I would say I am ambitious and I want to do better, but I want to do better and to write books. And I know that a lot of the stuff that I could want is out of my control. So yeah, I don't know if it makes sense.
But I think, Rach, if you think about The Other Bridget, that is a fantastic concept. That is a bestseller concept. And so you can, I think, you can think about marketing and the concept and say, is this a concept that may get me a bestseller? And that absolutely is. I mean, the cover was,
people were excited
and
about
then,
my cover.
you put that aside, you write the book, and you try to fulfill the promise of that title. You try to fulfill, that book, make that book the kind of book that people who pick it up because of the title and because of the concept are going to enjoy. And hopefully, if the publisher does what they should do, then you'll get that result. Yeah. So I think, I put my marketing hat on and I say, what's the market doing? What's a concept that is universally appealing?
Mm-hmm.
And then I put that hat away and then I do my creative stuff and don't worry about whether it's going to sell well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think you can.
Macy Yates said that at the conference, the Romance Writers Conference in Frio a couple of years ago, that she does, when she's coming up with a concept or pitching it to her publishers and stuff, she thinks in terms of marketing and how they would do it. But then she forgets about that to write the book. It's all these different hats that we have to wear, isn't it? Like, it's hard.
Well, Rachel, because you keep lists of titles, so I'm wondering when you're coming up with those titles, because I know that you have some for which there's not yet a story attached. When that title comes to you, is it because you sort of get that instinct that that's a concept, that's like a high concept?
To me, I've seen over, a couple of decades of trying to write and then publishing, and some books doing really well, not just mine, but like some of mine doing well, some are not doing as well as others, some other people I know doing well and others not, despite what I think of the book quality, kind of thing. And it often comes down to marketing. Yes, often, what Christina said. But I do feel that cover and title go into that high concept premise, and so part of a high concept premise to me, I think, is getting a really hooky title. Mm-hmm. And the title kind of sometimes, says the premise without you even needing to, like with The Other Bridget, originally was The Other Bridget Jones. I think that's a high concept title as well. And probably the title's more high concept than the actual premise. And so, yes, I've got a few titles which I think are, very marketable. It's coming up with a story for them. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? A concept is not a conflict.
Yes.
as I have discovered to my cost.
Yes.
I pitch these concepts because my agent is very much it's not big enough. It's not big enough. It's not big enough. I did 6 proposals for my last book. And luckily I ended up getting a 2-book deal out of that because I'd had so many proposals.
Yeah.
But it's so, but then you think, well, now I have to come up, like, it's about a thing. Like I had, Miss Moneypenny, the real Miss Moneypenny, and I had, a secret illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Windsor. But then, like, what is the story there?
Yeah. I often find that's the problem for me. People would say to me, like, even my publisher, currently, like when I first signed with Penguin, I sent her a whole load, or even before, I think it was, sent her a whole load of like possible ideas, and there was probably 15 kind of things. And she's like, oh my gosh, I've never been sent, this many ideas by this is amazing. And I'm like, well, they're not really, though, they're not really full concepts, they're and people sometimes say to me, I've got a couple of friends say, you've got so many ideas. And I don't feel like I do at all. I feel like I've got seeds of ideas. And then coming up with the story for that is, so yeah, the high concept thing is hard.
I think also to acknowledge, so you just talked about the 15 titles you sent to your publisher, Christine. You mentioned 6 story ideas. This is also part of publishing that the Instagram version doesn't show, right? Where it is that you are both incredibly well established, big selling authors, and at this stage of your careers, you're still generating lots of ideas. It's not as if it's just a one and done thing. You go to your publisher, or the publisher says, oh yes, whatever you want to write next is great, which is what it may look like from the outside, to especially aspiring writers who think that once you're in, that's it, that it's the rails run. But you both separately still coming up with all these different ideas, conjuring all that creativity, and only one of them will be on that contract, or maybe 2 of them will be on the contract, as it was for you, Christine. And I know Rach sometimes gets 2 book contracts. So it's just to acknowledge that it's not this clean process once you're in for anyone, I think.
Yeah, and I have to research the history behind each idea as well. So it's really grueling. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm just going to lie. I'm just going to make it up
you can fix it later.
and sell it. And then, if I sell it, then I'll research it properly. But
that's fair enough, I reckon. I'm going to ask you a
I
question
never
about
remember the
that in a second.
synopsis.
But what I was going to say is, what I find hard is because I am not a planner at all, like really, like that if I'm asked to pitch an idea, well, I'm writing something else and I'm, they're thinking ahead. They're like, oh, what's your book for next year? And what's your book for the year after that? I really struggle to write a proposal because like my brain just doesn't think that way. So I guess because like I worked from a number of years, I worked with one publisher and they kind of got used to that, and it was like, well, we'll contract you for a women's fiction and we'll contract you for a romance, and that's all we need. And now I'm working with a new publisher who wants a little bit more, and yeah, it's hard to come up with that in advance for me. But what I was going to ask you is, you said you wrote 6 proposals. And sorry, we've gone off completely on topic and stuff, but it's just so fascinating to be able to talk to you about whatever comes along. But do you say, like, well, each of those proposed 6 books, did you have any that you really, really wanted to write? Like, or was there some that you had that buzz, sort of that joy for, and then others you were kind of thinking, well, I need to give her a few options? And so that's the first part of the question. The second part is, the ones that you got that she chose, were they the ones that you felt buzz about? And if not, how do you write a book that you're not so, sorry, that's a big question.
Yeah. There was a book. I don't know whether I should say the concept because I might write it one day, but
and don't.
Yeah.
Speak in general terms.
But suffice to say that there was a movie star who was a spy, and I thought, oh, that'd be so good to write. But it was World War II, and World War II is over as far as Costco and Walmart say. So it was like, oh, it's a really great concept, and that it hasn't been done before. I could pitch it for you if you really, really, really want to write it, but you're swimming against the tide. And unfortunately, One Woman's War, which I really loved writing, and it was about, the whole inception of James Bond and Ian Fleming in the war, and the real woman who inspired Miss Moneypenny, who was involved in Operation Mincemeat and all this. I just had a ball writing it because World War II, we're not taking those anymore. That got caught up in that kind of thing. So
the shops and stuff, you mean, like?
Yeah, Walmart and Costco, where World War II's over. So yeah, it is over. It's historical fiction.
It's been over a long decade.
Anyway, so I reluctantly put that one aside. And then another one that while she was considering it, I realized that the person I was writing about was a complete bigot, because I was getting through her memoir and she said something really offensive, and I just went, okay, I won't be writing about that person.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I think another thing that happened was that my editor came up with an idea
Yeah.
and really wanted me to write that book. And that turned into the Paris gown. And, I was thinking, three women share a couture gown. This was the concept, and it was
Yeah.
going to be like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And I'd already done a book about Dior, so she wanted it to be Dior. And, I like to come up with my own ideas.
Yeah.
But I just thought I could already sort of see these women, and they were such three great friends who'd been together in Paris for a while, and then had then sort of gone their separate ways and had real hardships, and then come back together again in Paris later on. And I just got, and it was usually with historical fiction, I was originally a total pantser, or organic writer, as people say. But with the historical fiction, because there's a timeline and
Yeah.
facts that you absolutely have to get right, or I think you do.
Yeah.
I did have to start plotting a little bit, but with this story, it's almost more like a historical women's fiction than a straight historical fiction. And I just had such a lovely time pantsing the hell out of that book.
Is that one the one that's coming out next?
Yeah, August. Yeah. Or September in Australia.
Awesome.
And so, I always say I can get enthusiastic, like if you just get over yourself,
Yep.
and you find a way to make yourself enjoy it, I think.
That's really good advice. Thank you.
And she was right. She, that was Lucia Macro, and she's been in, well, she's retired now, sadly, but she was in the business for many, many, many years, and she knew what she was doing. So I trusted her.
I always think, golly, if someone would give me an idea, like I've got other writer friends who their publishers have given them titles or said, I want you to write about this particular thing. And I'm like, why can't someone give me a high concept premise?
Because, Rach, it is a lot harder than it looks.
But I agree with what you said. Like, I was thinking that even, in theory, that seems like a great idea. It's like when someone comes up to you at an event and then says, I've got an awesome idea for a book. And I'm always like,
you go,
I'm wary because usually it's not. But also I'm like, yeah, give it to me. Like, hey, because but then I always think, and invariably it's you have to be excited and you have to get that excitement from somewhere. And if you're not into the idea or you haven't come up with it, I guess I always imagine it could be hard. But I like what you say about sort of, I guess you found what you're interested in someone else, like in that idea.
I think that's the key. And also even my own ideas. I mean, it's not plain, it's not plain sailing the whole time. You start to think, let's throw this out and start something else, because this is terrible and I wish I'd never come up with this idea, and who was the idiot who proposed that?
Constantly.
And so I think you constantly have to do that with your own ideas.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying it, that's what I was thinking about, because I am thinking about a couple of proposals to try at the moment, and it's so easy to go, oh, this is great, and then I come back the next day to add a bit more, and I think, I don't know, why was I excited about this topic? I don't, but obviously, if we've had, I mean, there's a reason you came up with an idea in the first place. There's a reason you wanted to write something, or you were interested in a certain title or a certain subject, and so I guess it's a matter of if you lose that, dig back. And often, like, that's the same with when you're writing a book and you lose the love for it, right? You gotta go back to, why did I like this premise in the first place, and sort of find that excitement continually.
And sometimes you got to go back and reread a bit that you really thought you did well, and then you sort of thought, it's not so bad after all, I really like these characters.
On that, we probably should wrap up soon, but I want to ask you one more question. Sophie might have some too, just because you reminded me of something, and we've talked about this before. You say you read, sometimes you'll go back and read a paragraph. Have you ever reread any of your books, and how do you feel about that?
No, never. But I can say that, how sometimes you have to find an excerpt.
Yes. Yes.
and you always find a typo, and it's
Oh
just
yeah. The reason I
oh
asked is
no.
today I was trying to write a bit of my book, The Bad Bridesmaid, and because I never planned much, like I didn't plan on writing a semi-linked book sequel, so I didn't, take notes about the character that I'm now writing, and I had to say where she lived, and I knew that I'd put that somewhere in the book, but I couldn't remember what it was, or so I tried first to go on my document on this computer and search house, place, Fred's place. None of it worked. And I was like, so then I'm flicking through a sort of copy of here, and then I'd start accidentally reading a bit that I'd forgotten totally. I was like, that's not too
Yeah.
bad. Maybe
It's like someone else wrote it.
so that's very encouraging, because often, when I'm writing, I very rarely think that. I'm much more likely to think to see what I think is not working, or, so yeah, it's a nice reminder sometimes, but I don't usually do it. So yeah, it's wondered.
Yeah,
Well, I've had you talking for quite a while. I'm just thinking it's Sunday evening in Sydney. We
Yes,
should probably
yes.
let you. But I just wanted to check if there's anything else you'd like to mention, because it's been so interesting for me to hear about your US publishing trajectory as well, because that's a side I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I just wanted to say I really love this podcast, and I think it's such a great idea to have you both doing it. And I hope that it continues for many more episodes.
Well,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
having me.
No,
Yeah.
it's just been so interesting to talk to you.
Yeah. And that whole, when you just mentioned the US thing, Sophie, I think it is really interesting, because Sophie and I are both published in Australia, and then you've done a bit of Australia, but a lot of your career has been in the US. And I think, people often think you get a deal in the US. Like I find this, people look at our publishing in Australia and they think, oh, great you're published there, but you really need to be published in the US to make it, the be all and end all, like kind of to make it properly. And I think what's so interesting is, that the US, Australia, the UK, they might be bigger in different size, they might be different in terms of size, but the actual journey that a writer goes on, and the same highs and lows that you have in terms of sales, or publishers leaving, you get a contract and everyone's excited, but then for some reason they're not excited about like it's good to know that there's no one answer, and there's no sort of surefire way to do this business, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the genre you're writing as to where it's best to publish. If you've got quintessentially Australian books,
Yeah.
and yeah, I've got lots of theories about that. That's another day.
Yeah, I know, that's another session, because yeah, it's true. I actually wrote an article years ago that you kind of, for Heartstock, I think you have to kind of choose. Like sometimes there's very few people, I think I mentioned this before, so I'm repeating myself, but there's very few people that do amazingly in every territory. Very few. And sometimes you have to, you said you're quite strategic, and that you have to sometimes make that decision, where are you going to put your eggs, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, historical fiction is easy because I can write European set books and sell them to the US, and I would not write a book set in the US.
Yeah.
So that limits my options, because if I want to be in that market, what other
historical fiction, I mean, you would know more than me, but I can't even really think of a huge amount of historical fiction authors that write US settings.
Yeah, exactly. Some do, but yeah,
but Europe does definitely. Seems to be where it's at.
yeah, for the moment anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, through the magic of the internet, I'm going to put us on pause. We'll say goodbye to you, and then Rachel and I will tail this off. So thank you so much for your time and for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Bye.
Rachel, I really did find it so interesting to talk to Christine about her particular genres of writing and publishing into the US market, because there are differences between the US and here, which as a published author, she would know. As you said, sometimes it looks like the rivers of gold when you get published in the US, but it's a big competitive market, and probably feels like a big bruising competitive market for authors who are in it, as she seems to have felt a little bit.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's a whole episode. It would be great to discuss with a couple of people who are published in the US the differences they find. Love
Yeah,
that.
well, we'll get our thinking caps on. In the meantime, I'm going to let you get on with the rest of your afternoon, perhaps to walk your dog or not.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll hopefully see you again next time.
See ya.